You're listening to Heritage Radio Network.
Welcome back to Last Call. We are looking at an article today called The Death of Partying in the USA and Why It Matters by Derek Thompson. He is referencing a recent viral article that was published by The Atlantic by Ellen Cushing titled Americans Need to Party More. The data shared here is pretty staggering. Only 4.1% of households in the US report attending or hosting a party on a typical weekend or holiday. That is down significantly, about 50% since 2003. And the declines are the highest for the youngest people in the partying generation, the 15 to 24-year-olds. So Derek dives into why this is happening. And I was very interested by this because I'm reading we're hosting less. And meanwhile, I'm seeing a huge surge in hosting content on social media, meaning a lot of food and beverage influencers are leaning into this, like how to host a party. And it makes me think, especially with the timeline of this decline, did basically an entire generation of kids who are now adults not ever learn how to host a party because their parents were, parents on the decline of hosting? And are we craving that? So I'm so curious to hear what you guys thought reading this article.
Yes, I found this article alarming, but reflective of what I actually see happening. It was truly surprising to learn that almost every age group has cut their party time in half in the last 2 decades. Like you mentioned, young people are the most impacted. So this data showed that Americans aged 15 to 24 spent 70% less time attending or hosting parties than they did in 2003. Now, think about that. Since that time, we have seen the rise of social media. We've seen online gaming. We've seen online gambling. And this really hits home for me because this is something we've just been debating so much on Business of Drinks and recently in our Bev Alc debate club with Rabobank, that these days, younger people especially are just getting their dopamine hits in different ways. And they're substituting social interaction and the types of, drinking with friends that we used to do. They're substituting that with solo behaviors that are very much focused on screens. So my thinking is, this really is becoming a spiral of self-sustaining dopamine hits that I equate to junk food. So it satisfies a momentary craving when you're scrolling or doing these online gaming things, but you're left feeling hungry because you don't have that IRL interaction with friends. And for the beverage alcohol industry, I truly do believe that this is having an impact on sales statistics, perhaps even more than health concerns.
Yeah, there were some real interesting ideas. I think it's worth pointing out that Thompson recognizes that this is not a new phenomena. 25 years ago, a pretty famous sociological text was published called Bowling Alone: The Collapse and Revival of American Community by Robert D. Putnam, who recognized, basically he said, in the 50s, 60s, 70s, people bowled in leagues, and now when you go to a bowling alley, you bowl alone. And this kind of this insidious nature of, call it loneliness, antisocial behavior, has increased over the last 25 years. Thompson points out that the usual suspects aren't surprising. They are things like work, which has been transformed by the pandemic. Pre-pandemic, I used to go out with colleagues from the office to happy hour. That doesn't happen when I'm working remotely. Parenthood, be it new parents drinking less because of fiscal pressure, because of emotional pressure, because of any number of factors, and screens, both for younger generations and older generations. And this is something, as Erica mentioned, we talked about. Further, the notion that some of the messaging around health has really resonated with younger generations more so than even older ones. Thompson points out that the share of 18 to 34-year-olds who say, quote, drinking in moderation is bad for your health has doubled in the last 25 years to 65%. So, these narratives around whether something can be enjoyed in moderation or not, particularly when it comes to alcohol, is something that, if kids are going to get together, if they're going to party, they might use alternative substances, whether they are controlled or otherwise, but not maybe alcohol. So tons of implications, not necessarily any one thing that someone might take an action to, other than the notion that we all recognize that drinking has a social aspect, and when that is missing, it is very hard to build a brand around the notion of singular enjoyment alone.
Absolutely. I would be remiss to not touch on one phrase that really stood out to me in Derek's article, which was not even phrase, just a term, communal labor. And this was in the section that's talking about how women entering the workforce and having salaried jobs versus just working within the home has changed the fact that they don't have the time or bandwidth to manage the family's social calendar. So a lot of these things are not being planned. There are less stay-at-home moms to plan community events and even just gatherings around communal labor. For example, I had a neighbor invite me over recently to help her move mulch. And some people might think that is an insane thing to ask somebody to do for you, but it goes hand in hand with something I've been seeing on TikTok, which is if you want a village, you have to be a villager. And I think that for a long time, people have relied on boundaries too much to build up these walls around themselves to protect themselves, and in return have actually, protected themselves a little bit too much, and we have become antisocial. There's also the glamorization of antisocial nature. There's a street brand literally called Antisocial Social Club. I think it sold 2 years ago for a lot of money. And so there's the glamorization of being antisocial. But I think that articles like this and the one in the Atlantic are just shining the light on the fact that this could be harmful to us, and it is. So, yeah, I don't know how to change that other than continuing to go move mulch for my neighbor when she asks. So thank you for joining us on the Business of Drinks, and give us a follow. If you're not following and you're listening, follow us. We're on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, anywhere you get your podcasts. Please hit like, share, star ratings, all of it helps us find new listeners. And if there's anything you'd like us to cover on the podcast, you can reach us in our DMs on Instagram and LinkedIn, or in our email at podcast@businessofdrinks.com. We look forward to hearing from you.